Hello guys.
Hey, Irfan.
Hi Greg.
Did you like your panorama? That was cool. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, I just made to the meeting. I did not update anything in today's agenda. If somebody else has some points to talk about in today's agenda, we can take them on priority.
Does anybody want to give a retrospective on KubeCon? Those who were at the various meetings where the SIG was present.
Yeah, I can do a little bit with respect to multi-cluster. Greg, you can also maybe, if you attended some other sessions also, you can maybe chime in. Is Nikhil on the call? Nikhil was also there. So he can also probably put in some.
No, he's not
updates.
here. He's out right now.
Okay, so with respect to multi-cluster, my take was uh, that there is a lot of interest in multi-cluster use cases still, because there were a lot of people who did attend the deep dive and the intro, and there were a lot of questions around the maturity when we are going to actually have V2 federations, alpha, or uh, some maturity questions about the cluster registry also. The replies to which were straightforward. The reply to maturity of V2 federation was a little tricky. Apart from that, with respect to multi-cluster, I think two other important announcements was one, I think, was operator framework, the core OS announcement of operator framework. I think there are some overlaps between the federation work that we are doing and the operator framework, because it's the same use cases can to some extent also be implemented by operator framework. Uh, Apart from that, there were other guys which actually mentioned, I did talk to meet, who are still very interested in federation kind of use cases, and they are looking forward to V2 becoming beta or something like that this year.
So when you say operator framework, is it anything beyond operator that's been around for a while already?
So operator concept probably has been there since 1.5, 2 years. And classical example is HCD. So if a user wants to install HCD across multiple clusters, so there is operator for that, and there are many other similar operators out there. The operator framework that was disclosed, I didn't go through it in detail, but what I understood is that they have probably published. I'm not also not sure how much of that is open source yet. They have published a SDK which enables users to develop such operators more easily or comparatively easily than how it was earlier to develop an operator or develop on the concept of the operator. So that seemed to be a big announcement because it was announced as part of a keynote, and I did attend one of the talks by one core OS guy, which actually was titled as multi-cluster operations using operators or operator framework, something like that. Uh, but apart from that, I had a chat with him. What he mentioned was that he's in his slides itself. He did present about cluster registry. Also, he did present one slide about Federation V2 also. And end of it, I had a short chat with him. His point was that probably it is still to be concluded or evolve as to how both can coexist or how both can interact with each other, like with respect to the multi-cluster operations.
Okay.
So yeah, that is more or less about what I probably got back about multi-cluster from the meetup, from the conference.
So what would you say the reception was in terms of, this is the first time we kind of in a large crowd present V2. Was there some anxiety about V1, its status? Because we recently only updated the docs to say where things stood. Were people asking questions, what about V1 and when we'll go to any form of GA?
Actually, surprisingly, I did not receive. Greg can correct me because he was there in both of the deep dive and intro. I do not remember questions where there were questions where they were saying or asking about what happens to really V1, or maybe there was only one question which was like what happens to V1, for which the reply was that we are not going to further support it, so it will remain at that, and whatever effort that we as a community are putting would be towards V2 and evolve that towards alpha and beta.
Yeah, I don't think there was much comment on V1, or I don't remember anything at that session about people asking about V1, which is a little surprising in retrospect.
So no passionate response, or
no one with pitchforks.
Right, because in the channel we see a lot of people trying it out, and can't possibly work for them, not in the current state. But I guess these people were represented in the crowd. Okay. I'm just hopeful the annotations we have that you added to the documentation are at least enough to steer people away from it. We'll actually probably see in the Slack channel if that was helpful in the coming months.
Yeah, what I also sort of inferred that people who are interested in Federation or trying out or are waiting for it to evolve into something more production ready, they already are aware of all the developments and whatever changes that has happened in last 6 months or so. So that might be one reason that we did not see any anxious questions in the intro or the deep dive.
I don't know. I tend to think of the KubeCon crowd as a mix of developers and users, not necessarily only developers. So, I mean, we have a lot of people in the Slack channel who are not developers who read the documentation or trying to bring up Federation. So that's why I asked from the perspective of a user.
I guess what I'd say about the multi-cluster sessions is seem like they're all very well attended. I mean, the intro, the deep dive, the CubeMCI talk. We saw questions at all of them, so that was good. I mean, a lot of questions from the audience. Yeah, people wanted to ask about stuff afterwards, and
did anyone sound like they were actually having a problem that matched the use case, and that they would actually be interested in putting things into production anytime soon, or was it mostly speculative and like, where are people in the room, I guess, is my question. Is multi-cluster for a problem that people are aware of but not yet engaging in, or is it something where people are like, hey, I've got these challenges now, and I'm desperate for anything to put out the fire?
I think they're sort of at the beginning of their multi-cluster journey for a lot of them. They're sort of at the stage of a handful of clusters and are kind of getting by with scripting or whatever, or manual stuff. So I think they're interested in solutions, but not like dying under it. The way to it.
Because if you remember, like a year ago, we had split the domain space between federating kind of cluster administrative stuff versus app administrative stuff. Where cluster administrative would have been policy, namespaces, resources, and that we're not addressing in Federation V2. Rather, we're focusing on federating more at the app level.
I see.
So I guess my question, I couldn't attend, but What I would have liked to have a read on is whether at the cluster administrative level, they're trying to replicate configuration, like cluster level configurations, or if it's more important to prioritize app level type federation.
To me, it seemed more like it was about like having your test cluster, your staging clusters, your product cluster, and sort of being able to have a similar setup or identical setup across those. So not necessarily as much the app, but more the cluster config, cluster administration.
Okay.
I remember questions in the deep dive, more than one, in fact, centered around the RBAC support and how, like, what's the plan about uh, supporting the RBAC API, which can be propagated to the clusters, and what's the plan around segregating the access control for each of the federated API. So, so that seemed like it did stem from people trying to use it, and they already know that that is not aggregated right now properly, and that doesn't work if you want a proper access control for especially user use cases, not the admin use cases.
So are you talking about essentially duplicating RBAC configuration in each individual cluster? Or are you talking about a layer that on top of those clusters federates RBAC?
I'm actually talking about both. So questions were around both. So there was a question which mentioned that what's your plan about federating the RBAC API so that the same thing is replicated. So if a user wants to create a RBAC resource, the resource should be created in each of the clusters or propagated into each of the clusters. And there was a question around this also, that how are you planning to have access control in the federation control plane itself for each of the API that you actually have in federation control plane.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that tells me that people probably are aware about that we have the admin privilege, or we have to have the admin privilege to do current operations in federation, and this solution is not there yet. That might be one reason stopping them from really using federation V1 or V2.
And so there's also a talk that I went to by CoreOS. I don't remember if this is where they talked about operator framework or not, but it was like the multi-cluster without a federation.
Yes, that's the one which
that's what you're talking about?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the points they raised in there was that the access control and like, you know, if your cluster, the like control plane of the federation is compromised, then basically all the member clusters are compromised. Or, you know, access to one gives you access to all of them. So that's sort of the same vein of the RBAC for clusters.
Because we're impersonating through the controllers. That's the idea.
I understand the problem is that the controller has auth to each of the clusters, as opposed to maybe a pull model if each cluster pulls, you know, desired state from a central point.
Correct. Currently, we sort of have we have to give access to all the APIs which we are federating into each of the clusters.
Right. Did you add anything, Ian, about what you saw there?
No, I think you reiterated many of the different things. I think the only other thing was that I went to a few Istio talks, and so there's some questions about the interactions with Istio and multi-cluster. So I think as Istio continues to pick up speed, I think we'll continue to see people asking about multi-cluster in conjunction with it.
Yeah, one relevant topic is the fact that they, early on in the Istio development, they did pick up cluster registry. It's in their code base, but right now they're using it in a slightly different manner that I guess Federation would be using it, which is not a problem per se. But the fact that we don't necessarily address where to store credentials as part of Cluster API. If you remember, we kind of punt on it and point to an external auth provider. Has forced them to diverge a little bit from our intended model. So I know Jonathan's not here.
Here he is.
Oh, he is. He's in the middle box. Hey, Jonathan. Working on getting the API to beta, but I'm going to try to reach out to the Istio folks to see what may be missing in the API before we move to beta, so that they can use it in a way we intended it to be used. But that's the only status update I have for cluster registry, unless Jonathan wants to give it.
No, I think that about covers it. With KubeCon last week, there was not necessarily as much progress made in any other technical things. We had made a decision a few weeks ago to move to a CRD and to namespace the object, but I believe that was already brought up. I can't remember if that had been brought up in the SIG yet, or if that meeting was after the last SIG meeting. But in any case, that work is moving and will hopefully move a bit faster now that KubeCon is over.
So do you think we should engage with Istio in some way about talking about multi-cluster things, or have you been talking to Istio or thinking about how like multi-cluster Kubernetes and multi-cluster Istio interact?
I have the main people working on multi-cluster Istio at this point are at IBM. They're not necessarily here. I'll still reach out to them, but they're not on the same floor. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, hi, I'm Megan. I can interject here. So I'm Cisco, and some team on our floor has also worked on some of the multi-cluster Istio stuff, and we're going to be talking to them this week. So if as those conversations develop, I can post to the Slack channel with some info. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
Yeah, we have some other point that somebody has some other point that we might want to talk about today. Yeah, in that case, if I'm considering that we don't have any other points, in that case, should we close the meeting short?
Sounds fine to me.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. See you guys next week. Bye.
All right. See ya.
See ya.